Top dangerous places to visit due to crime. Welcome to the Wander World Network. While rich in culture and history, certain sites are infamous for high crime rates, making them risky for tourists. These places are dangerous for travelers due to rising violence, organized crime, and civil turmoil. Some regions provide stunning scenery or unique experiences, but visiting these dangerous areas is risky. These regions should be avoided unless essential, or if travelers are well prepared and informed owing to political instability, pervasive violence, or persistent crime. Let's dive in. Number 20. Indonesia. As a source, transit, and destination country for trafficked individuals, Indonesia faces a serious problem with human trafficking. In Asia and the Middle East, labor traffickers use compulsion, such as debt and force, to take advantage of Indonesians. Over 50% of Indonesian female trafficking cases abroad are caused by fraudulent labor recruitment agents and subagents. Tens of thousands of women and children fall victim to sexual exploitation every year, making them especially susceptible. Children may also be coerced into engaging in drug trafficking, and traffickers use women and girls as forced laborers for domestic work. Working-class Indonesians have become more vulnerable as a result of the pandemic, particularly women and children who have lost their money and are therefore more open to exploitation. In actuality, it is thought that the amount of people trafficking in the nation has grown. According to reports, Myanmar people are becoming more susceptible to human trafficking in Indonesia. Additionally, Indonesia is a major source, transit, and destination for human smuggling, which is frequently connected to labor migration and is made possible by recruitment agencies. The practice persists despite attempts to restrict the fees that recruitment companies charge, and it is said that dishonest authorities help to keep the market open. Before switching smugglers, people transiting through Indonesia typically stay for 2 to 4 weeks, and it is thought that border authorities bribe people to submit forged identification documents. Many Indonesians, particularly those in eastern areas like Nusa Tenggara and Maluku, rely on human smuggling as a source of income. Indonesian fishermen primarily aid the smuggling of asylum seekers, and migration flows over sea routes from Indonesia to Malaysia remain hazardous and occasionally lethal. With over 1 million undocumented Indonesian workers, the reopening of the Malaysian economy is increasing demand for foreign labor, and many Indonesians are looking to return to Malaysia. Additionally, Rohingyas have been smuggled into Malaysia from Indonesia. In Indonesia's informal sector, where syndicates control markets like gambling and counterfeit goods, extortion and protection racketeering are commonplace. The rise in online and delivery services has also been exploited by financial crime syndicates and illicit online lending syndicates, which frequently work with local authorities, are becoming an increasingly significant issue. Street marketplaces and other economies have historically been dominated by gangs of thugs and militias, and new kinds of gangs and violent rent seekers still collect money from nearby companies. Wood harvesting and land conversion for palm oil plantations are the main drivers of illicit logging in Indonesia, which is a significant hub for practice. The majority of the industry's revenues are retained domestically, and it involves influential brokers, private sector business people, and regional political figures. With annual losses of billions of dollars in uncollected non-tax revenues, the trade has a significant detrimental influence on the environment, social relations, and the Indonesian economy. Implementation is still lacking, and the judicial system has not been able to hold those guilty of the crime accountable despite efforts to stop the trade, such as the installation of a timber legality verification system. In actuality, individuals who finance and benefit from illegal logging are frequently exempt from prosecution, but those who participate in it are frequently punished. Number 19. Russia. In Europe, Asia, and North America, the trafficking of Russian women and children for sexual exploitation is still very common. Additionally, victims from Russia and its neighbors are trafficked inside for forced labor, forced begging, and sexual exploitation. In addition to private sector actors and criminal organizations, state-embedded actors also participate in human trafficking. To ensnare victims of human trafficking, criminal actors frequently employ deceit and debt bondage. Vulnerable groups, like homeless people and immigrant nationals, are still being exploited. Children sent to Russia from occupied Ukraine are also vulnerable to human trafficking. Another important location for human smuggling is Russia. Illegal migrants are trafficked into Russia from Iran via Georgia and Azerbaijan. There are also non-regional people smuggling of some ethnic groups, including Chinese, Vietnamese, Koreans, and Afghans. Additionally, Russia can be the source of unauthorized migrants who are trafficked into Belarus, Ukraine, and the Baltic nations. Russia is home to a thriving and growing illegal arms sector in addition to being the world's second largest illicit arms exporter, supplying superpowers like China and India. A sizable portion of the total quantity of weapons shipped from Russia comes via black and gray markets, and the armed conflict in Ukraine has led to fresh flows of arms trafficking into and out of the nation. Concerns have also been raised about illicit weapons infiltrating Russia's mainland through its occupied territories, which has led to a sharp rise in gun-related crimes in recent years. In the illegal wildlife trade, Russia is a significant source, transit, and destination nation. In addition to the systematic trafficking of tigers, bears, wolves, and wildlife items from Russia to China, other exotic species are also brought into Russia to meet the country's expanding domestic demand. In contrast, cocaine use has surged in Russia, particularly among youth. Historically, the drug's demand was centered in a few major cities, including St. Petersburg, Kazan, Sochi, and Moscow, but in recent years, its availability has expanded nationwide. After making stops in Europe or Africa, the majority of cocaine that is smuggled out of South America, primarily from Ecuador, arrives at the port of St. Petersburg. Cocaine is trafficked into Russia by air or land using mules by both Russian-based and foreign criminal networks, including those from Ecuador, Serbia, and Lithuania. Number 18. Libya, due to the relative stability in western Libya, which allows smugglers to move around and have more room for supplies, as well as the return of more advanced networks that concentrate on creating intricate but more lucrative routes. Human smuggling activity in Libya has increased, with tens of thousands of people leaving the Libyan coast for Europe. The country's east has also seen the emergence of departure zones, which has contributed to the rising migrant population. This practice is still linked to high rates of violence against smuggled individuals, high death rates at sea, and extortion, even if violence and exploitation seem to have decreased overall as high-value markets have once again gained prominence. Crimes against the nation's refugees and migrants may be considered crimes against humanity. Armed organizations in the nation rely heavily on market taxation and extortion as revenue streams. Carjackings, holdups, and kidnappings for ransom are frequent occurrences, particularly when it comes to smuggling people. Additionally, it has been stated that criminal organizations obtain money from nearby businesses or marketplaces in return for security. Armed organizations are trying to obtain harmful information about state leaders and exploiting it to extort or blackmail them, a practice known as cyber racketeering that is also receiving more attention. Some species are still at risk from the illicit shooting of birds for the domestic and international markets. Alongside them, numerous wild species are either in the country or traveling, such as chimpanzees, jackals, striped hyenas, and even large cats. Illegal shootings have increased since the Civil War due to the abundance of weaponry. Libya's marine variety is in danger of extinction due to overfishing and illegal, unreported, and unregulated IUU fishing, which puts wild turtle species in jeopardy. According to international data, Libya is currently among the nations that are performing the poorest when it comes to combating IUU fishing. Another significant issue is the illegal trading of non-renewable resources, especially gas and oil. The majority of fuel that is smuggled is imported stock that is either sold locally on the black market at higher costs or diverted from the consumption market and smuggled out of the nation. Despite a decline in the use of heroin in Libya over time, the drug is nevertheless trafficked inside or across the nation. Recent seizures have sparked worries that the nation may become more susceptible to the trade once peace returns. On the other hand, the cocaine trade has grown, with quantities of the substance being smuggled into the nation through ports in the east and west. According to reports, the substance is also shipped in from the Sahel. Large amounts of cocaine that are intended for re-export to Egypt and Europe are stored in coastal zones. Cocaine use in Libya has expanded in recent years, moving outside of the capital and other major cities where it was previously forbidden. Cannabis resin is still trafficked into Libya through major ports, as well as the country's western and southern borders, making Libya an important transit country. Although cyber attacks are not common in Libya, both individuals and organizations have been attacked as a result of flaws in software protocols and inadequate services. Such strikes, which provide warring parties with an inexpensive way to accomplish their military objectives, have become more frequent as a result of the nation's protracted conflict. Most attacks that are reported have political or ideological motivations. Additionally, Libya is home to a group that has been using web servers' accessible apps to attack neighboring countries' foreign ministries and telecom corporations. Number 17. Panama. Due to its strategic location and free port status, Panama is the primary port of entry for illegal firearms from the United States and Central America traveling to South America, primarily Colombia. It is thought that the country's import restriction on weapons, which was in effect from 2011 to 2019, contributed to the growth of a black market dominated by senior security-related government personnel. Evidence also suggests that private security firms, mafia-style organizations, and criminal networks, as well as low and medium-level officials, are equally involved in the arms trafficking industry. Panama serves as a suitable logistical hub for the illegal introduction of weapons due to the abundance of long-range weaponry in the United States, and the arsenal remains from El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaraguan conflicts. Speedboats and canoes are used to transport weapons from Panamanian ports to coastal cities in Colombia. Through the dense jungle across the Darien Gap, the Gulf Clan also transports weapons and narcotics. Despite the apparent magnitude of the market, the majority of the weapons are not typically sourced in Panama and only pass to the country on their way to their final destinations. Crime groups use Panama's advantageous location, notably the Darien Gap, to run their operations, making it a transit nation for human smuggling as well. With the assistance of dishonest police officers and other officials, smuggling networks bring migrants to the United States from nations including Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, Ecuador, Pakistan, Ghana, Ethiopia, India, and Bangladesh. Panama is also a destination and transit point for commodities, especially illicit gold from Colombia, because of its lenient tax rules, which encourage illegal mining financiers to establish bases there. Additionally, luxury goods manufactured of minerals are in high demand locally in Panama, which fuels the illicit market. Other minerals that are mined in Mexico, including mercury, are typically shipped to Panama via ports in Guatemala. After that, mercury, in particular, is smuggled into Venezuela and Colombia to be used in gold mining. Darien Province, which borders Colombia, is the province most impacted by illicit mining. Farmers and indigenous people are recruited by Colombian mafias in this area, including the Bandas criminals Backroom, which includes the Urabenos and former revolutionary armed forces of Colombia FARC dissident groups. There are significant environmental worries that small-scale and some large-scale mining ventures are harming the Mesoamerican biological corridor, even though the effects of small-scale legal or illegal mining are unknown. Due to its advantageous location between North and South America, Panama has long been a major transit and storage hub for the great bulk of drugs that are transported from Colombia to the United States. Local criminal networks have grown as a result of the rise in drug use associated with the increased number of international tourists. Although heroin is typically imported in lesser amounts than cocaine, the heroin trade does not have a significant influence in Panama. On the other hand, the main criminal market in Panama is cocaine trafficking, which involves transnational organizations with assistance from local groups and state-embedded actors. As gangs vie to offer transportation and security services to drug traffickers, cocaine trafficking poses a danger to national security. Number 16. Kenya. Kenya continues to be a major hub for East African people smuggling, and in recent years, new hotspots have appeared all around the nation. Kenya is now a transit nation rather than a destination. In Kenya, human traffickers mostly move undocumented migrants from Somalia and the Horn of Africa to the Middle East and Gulf nations. It has been revealed that recruitment firms in Kenya and Uganda work together on people trafficking and smuggling projects. The main causes of migrant smuggling are open borders and lax enforcement of immigration laws due to dishonest state officials. However, there have been notable apprehensions of human smugglers. In Kenya, numerous criminal gangs are notorious for operating protection and extortion networks, mostly in urban areas like Nairobi and Mombasa. In Kenya, arms trafficking is still a major problem. The main destination for arms trafficking to conflict areas is Kenya. The problem is thought to be made worse by border permeability and the cattle theft phenomenon. Due to their involvement in stock theft, pastoralist groups like the Pocket and Turkana along the Kenyan-Ugandan border and the Barana along the Kenyan-Ethiopian border are notoriously heavily armed. The arms trafficking industry in Kenya has also been made worse by the decades-long armed conflict in neighboring Somalia. The number of firearms crossing the border surged in 2021 as a result of Ethiopia's growing insecurity. According to reports, top government and political figures are involved in the trafficking of weapons to conflicting groups in South Sudan. Furthermore, it has been stated that corrupt Kenyan law enforcement officials conspire with al-Shabaab elements to traffic illegal weapons into Kenya from Somalia. Women, young boys, and children are used by criminal organizations to help import illegal weaponry. Although small-time merchants are thought to be primarily responsible for the flow of firearms into Kenya's underground markets, when combined, this represents a consistent and significant flood of guns. From Afghanistan and the Arabian Gulf, heroin is smuggled to Europe, the Americas, and other African countries via Kenya. Domestic heroin and cocaine misuse are major issues at the moment, especially along the coast. The heroin trade is highly competitive and lucrative, and it is not dominated by any one criminal organization. Despite the government's best efforts, corrupt state officials enable the West African and other organized crime groups' activities, as well as the trafficking of heroin inland. In Kenya, there is a noticeable connection between heroin trafficking and other criminal activities, like poaching, arms trafficking, people smuggling, and corruption. Cocaine is still a transshipment site for the worldwide cocaine trade, even if its volume is less than that of heroin or cannabis. Nigerian syndicates and integrated Italian mafia networks frequently dominate international transit shipments. Cocaine is transported to Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Somalia for both consumption and further trade when it reaches Kenya. Limited maritime enforcement skills that make drug interdiction difficult are the reason for Kenya's cocaine trafficking sector. The country's main organizers and enablers of cocaine distribution and retail sales are low-level law enforcement personnel. Number 15. Cambodia. Cambodia continues to be a major source of economic migration to the U.S., Thailand, and Malaysia. There are millions of illegal Cambodians in Thailand who work in construction, fishing, and agricultural industries, and are susceptible to labor exploitation and human trafficking. In Cambodia, smuggling networks and groups are dispersed, occasionally supported by social and familial networks, and corrupt officials also assist in smuggling operations. But since the COVID-19 outbreak, traffickers have been using online venues more and more. Regarding the nation's function as a destination, smugglers lure numerous victims to Cambodia with promises of simple labor and lavish benefits, only to have them imprisoned and made to labor in online scam centers. Because irregular migration is more flexible, quicker, and less expensive than normal migration, it persists through many forms of smuggling and other methods of operation despite legislative and administrative frameworks to govern and manage migration. In Cambodia, extortion and protection racketeering have grown to be serious problems, especially when it comes to forced crime in connection with cyber scams. Chinese nationals and criminal networks from other Southeast Asian countries make up the majority of the networks participating in this illegal sector. Extortion frequently occurs alongside drug supply, arms trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. Both domestic and foreign gangs are responsible for these crimes. Through Thailand, Cambodia acts as a transit nation for light and small arms smuggling into Myanmar. Although it is unlawful for citizens to own firearms, high authorities are frequently involved in shootings and frequently escape severe consequences. There are shootings between criminal gangs and the police, and small guns are being used by Chinese organized crime groups more and more, particularly in Sihanoukville. Even though the country's arsenal has been reduced by effective international involvement, corruption in the government, notably in security forces, increases the likelihood that government-controlled weapons may be trafficked. In recent years, charges of arms smuggling have been brought against several military leaders, including generals. Citing corruption, violations of human rights, and increasing Chinese military power, the U.S. has placed Cambodia under an arms embargo, which would make weapons trafficking and smuggling more common in the years to come. Illegal arms trafficking also uses social media as a forum. Sand mining and the illegal extraction of minerals, especially gold, are the main drivers of Cambodia's non-renewable resource crime market. The primary foreign sources of demand for these materials are Taiwan and Singapore. Despite Cambodia's permanent restriction on sand exports, the business is nevertheless permitted under certain permits and plays a crucial role in the nation's burgeoning building industry by producing cement. Number 14. Iran. There are issues associated with crime in Iran, just as there are in many other nations. Nevertheless, the form of criminal behavior and how it is reported can differ according to the influence of political, social, and cultural variables. It is possible to ascribe the high crime rate in particular regions of Iran to several underlying causes, including the following. Economic struggle. As a result of continuous economic sanctions, high unemployment rates, and inflation, a significant number of Iranians are experiencing challenges in their financial situation. As a result of this economic strain, criminal activities such as stealing, smuggling, and drug trafficking may become more prevalent. 2. Crimes related to drugs. Iran is situated near Afghanistan, which is the greatest producer of opium in the world. Because of this physical proximity, there have been considerable problems with drug trafficking and addiction, which have in turn fueled criminal activities related to these issues. 3. Urbanization and population density. In major cities such as Tehran and Mashhad, the presence of overcrowding, housing shortages, and a lack of social services can contribute to an increase in the number of incidents of petty crime and social unrest. 4. Dissatisfaction and unemployment among young people. A huge youth population that has few job opportunities or outlets for expression might be a contributing factor in increasing incidents of juvenile delinquency, vandalism, and conduct associated with gangs. 5. Corruption and legal inefficiencies. The rule of law can be weakened when there is limited transparency and inefficiencies within particular components of the judicial and law enforcement systems. This can allow certain crimes to go unpunished or underreported. The Iranian government has taken action to address the issue of crime by implementing more stringent enforcement, increased surveillance, and social reforms, despite the hurdles that have been presented. Nevertheless, in order to achieve long-term solutions, it is likely that economic recovery, social development, and greater governance would be required. Number 13. Honduras. Honduras, a Central American nation rich in natural beauty and cultural heritage, has for years struggled with one of the highest crime rates in the world. From rampant gang violence to widespread corruption, the country faces complex and deeply rooted challenges that continue to threaten the safety, stability, and prosperity of its people. Honduras has consistently ranked among the countries with the highest homicide rates globally. Although homicide numbers have declined in recent years, the crime rate remains alarmingly high, especially when it comes to gang violence, extortion, drug trafficking, and corruption. Honduras once had a homicide rate of over 80 per 100,000 people, one of the highest in the world. As of recent reports, this number has dropped but remains well above global averages. Many of these killings are linked to organized crime groups, particularly drug cartels and gangs. Cities like San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa have historically been among the most dangerous in the Western Hemisphere. Two of the most notorious gangs, Mara Salvatrucha and Barrio 18, wield immense power in Honduran society. These gangs engage in drug trafficking, human smuggling, extortion, kidnapping, and brutal enforcement control over neighborhoods. They often recruit children and teenagers from poor communities, using threats or coercion. Extortion is a widespread issue affecting businesses, public transport operators, and even schools. Small business owners are often forced to pay a tax to gangs in exchange for protection or risk death. This street tax has crippled local economies and driven thousands of people to flee the country. Honduras is a key transit country for cocaine moving from South America to the United States. Powerful drug cartels operate with impunity in some areas, often with the assistance or cooperation of corrupt officials. The country's geography, remote, mountainous terrain, and access to both the Caribbean Sea and Pacific Ocean makes it ideal for smuggling operations. Corruption and impunity. Deep-rooted corruption in law enforcement, the judiciary, and politics undermines the rule of law. Many crimes go unpunished due to bribery, lack of resources, or fear among police and prosecutors. High-profile politicians, including a former president, have been linked to drug trafficking and organized crime. Over half of Honduras's population lives in poverty, with high rates of youth unemployment. A lack of economic opportunity pushes young people toward gangs, which offer them a sense of identity, power, and financial gain, albeit through violence. Weak institutions. The police force is underfunded and, in many cases, infiltrated by criminals. Judicial institutions lack the capacity and independence to prosecute powerful criminals. Citizens often do not trust authorities and may be reluctant to report crimes. Many Hondurans attempt to flee the country due to violence and lack of opportunity, contributing to the migrant caravans heading north toward the United States. Internally, people are displaced from their homes by gangs taking control of neighborhoods or extorting residents. Psychological toll. Constant exposure to violence has left many communities traumatized and distrustful of authorities. Economic impact. Crime deters for investment in tourism, limits job growth, and forces businesses to close or operate under threat. Education and youth. Schools in gang-controlled zones are often under threat. Many children are forced to drop out due to safety concerns. Migration crisis. Thousands of Hondurans flee each year, citing crime and insecurity as primary reasons, contributing to ongoing humanitarian challenges at international borders. The government has implemented tough-on-crime strategies, including military involvement in policing and mass arrests of suspected gang members. Critics argue these policies often result in human rights violations and fail to address root causes. International aid and programs. The U.S. and other international partners have invested in community programs, anti-corruption initiatives, and police reform efforts. Programs focus on education, vocational training, and youth development aim to prevent gang recruitment. The now-defunct Maxim made progress in exposing corruption before being disbanded in 2020. Civil society organizations continue to push for greater accountability and transparency. Reducing crime in Honduras will require more than just harsher law enforcement. It will demand a comprehensive, long-term approach that tackles poverty, improves education, strengthens institutions, and restores trust in government. Without significant reforms, Honduran society will continue to suffer the devastating consequences of violence. Number 12. Syria. Syria has been plagued by crime and lawlessness for over a decade, largely as a result of the devastating civil war that began in 2011. The ongoing conflict has destroyed institutions, weakened law enforcement, and created a power vacuum in many parts of the country, allowing various forms of criminal activity to flourish. Before the war, Syria had a relatively low crime rate under its authoritarian regime, but the breakdown of state authority and the rise of multiple armed groups have transformed the country into a fragile environment where crime is often a daily reality for many citizens. The most pervasive forms of crime in Syria today include looting, kidnapping, smuggling, drug trafficking, extortion, and black market trade. Armed groups and militias, both pro-government and opposition-affiliated, have often resorted to criminal enterprises to finance their operations. Kidnappings for ransom became particularly common during the peak years of the conflict, targeting civilians, aid workers, and even children. In areas controlled by warlords or extremist factions, residents are frequently subjected to illegal taxation, forced recruitment, and property seizures. In regions still held by the Assad government, reports of corruption, bribery, and abuse of power within security forces are widespread, further eroding public trust and creating an environment of fear and instability. The drug trade has grown significantly, with Syria now being considered one of the world's primary producers of Captagon, a highly addictive amphetamine. Captagon production and smuggling are believed to involve influential networks, including figures with ties to the Syrian regime. The drug is trafficked across the Middle East and even into Europe, making it not only a domestic concern, but an international issue. This illicit industry generates massive profits for those involved and contributes to regional instability. Economic collapse has also played a crucial role in driving crime. With widespread poverty, unemployment, and inflation, many Syrians are forced into informal or illegal activities simply to survive. Essential goods like food, fuel, and medicine are scarce or unaffordable for a large part of the population. As a result, black market dealings and smuggling across borders with Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey have become common. Everyday crimes like theft, burglary, and assault have also risen, especially in urban areas that are struggling with overcrowding and limited access to public services. The Syrian judicial system has largely broken down, particularly in areas outside government control. Even in state-held territories, access to justice is limited, and the rule of law is often applied unevenly or manipulated for political purposes. Corruption runs deep in legal and law enforcement institutions, with many citizens reporting that justice is only available to those who can afford to pay bribes or who have connections within the regime. As a result, victims of crime frequently remain silent, either out of fear of retaliation or due to a lack of faith in any meaningful resolution. The collapse of civil infrastructure and displacement of millions of people have further contributed to the rise in crime. Refugees and internally displaced persons, many of whom live in camps or makeshift housing, often face exploitation, including forced labor, trafficking, and gender-based violence. Vulnerable populations, particularly women and children, are at heightened risk of abuse with limited protection or support systems in place. Although there have been efforts by local councils, community leaders, and international organizations to restore some sense of order in various parts of Syria, the overall situation remains dire. Without a stable political solution and significant investment in rebuilding institutions, addressing the root causes of crime will be extraordinarily difficult. Until then, the Syrian people continue to suffer under the weight of violence, corruption, and insecurity that have become a tragic norm in their daily lives. Number 11. Ecuador. Ecuador, formerly one of Latin America's safest countries, has seen a rapid and worrisome surge in crime, making regions of the country some of the most dangerous. Transnational drug trafficking groups, weakening state institutions, economic instability, and organized crime are driving this rise in violence and insecurity. The country has been shaken by a surge of killings, extortions, and armed confrontations in the coastal regions, especially Guayaquil. Ecuador's strategic location between Colombia and Peru, the world's top cocaine producers, fuels its crime wave. Ecuador does not produce much coca, but its location makes it a vital transit hub for North American and European cocaine shipments. Drug cartels from Mexico and Colombia have partnered with Ecuadorian gangs for logistics and enforcement for years. Cocaine is smuggled in containers heading for global markets through Guayaquil, one of South America's biggest ports. Gangs have turned against each other in a vicious war for drug route control, increasing violence. Institutional flaws and corruption have impeded state response. The police and judicial systems of Ecuador are underfunded, understaffed, and often infiltrated by criminals. Collaborating with drug traffickers by police and customs is widespread. Criminal groups feel impunity due to popular distrust in law enforcement. Instead of correctional facilities, prisons have become gang battlegrounds and criminal hotspots. Several brutal jail massacres in recent years have shown the scope of gang power and the fragility of the criminal system. Beyond drug trafficking and gang violence, Ecuador is seeing a rise in other crimes. Locally called vacunas, extortion threatens small business owners and transport operators daily. Criminal organizations demand protection money. Express and ransom kidnappings have escalated, causing panic in urban and rural communities. Armed robberies, home invasions, and assaults are on the rise, making many people feel frightened in public. Some communities have turned to private security or self-defense groups out of desperation and distrust of the authorities. Crime has increased due to economic distress. Criminal groups are recruiting more due to widespread unemployment, especially among young people, and the COVID-19 pandemic. In areas with little or no governmental presence, joining a gang or dealing drugs is a faster way to make money than working legally. Lack of chances and rising inequality have fostered crime. In response, the Ecuadorian government has declared states of emergency in high-crime districts, deployed military forces to reinforce police, and attempted prison reforms. These solutions have been called reactive and insufficient, failing to address the fundamental reasons behind the crime spike. Institutional reform has been delayed and resisted by established interests. Public dissatisfaction is growing as crime becomes one of Ecuadorians' top concerns. Rising crime has had major societal and psychological impacts. Fear has led many to avoid public venues and nighttime travel. Safety issues hurt businesses, investments, and tourists, previously a major economic sector. Effective governance, long-term security policies, and international cooperation are essential to retake control and restore safety and stability. If nothing is done, organized crime will continue to damage Ecuador's social fabric and regional security. Number 10. Lebanon. Lebanon, a country long known for its rich cultural heritage and resilient population, has in recent years found itself grappling with a deeply troubling rise in crime. This increase has been driven by a combination of severe economic collapse, political paralysis, and the weakening of state institutions. While Lebanon has faced periods of unrest in the past, the scale and depth of the current crisis have led to an environment where criminal activity has become increasingly widespread and, in many cases, normalized. From petty theft to organized smuggling, from violent crimes to systemic corruption, crime has infiltrated nearly every layer of Lebanese society, reflecting the broader collapse of governance and public trust. The root of Lebanon's escalating crime problem lies in its devastating economic collapse, which began accelerating in late 2019. The national currency has lost over 90% of its value, banks have frozen citizen savings, and unemployment has skyrocketed. As poverty deepens, affecting over 80% of the population, according to UN estimates, many people have turned to desperate measures to survive. Crimes such as shoplifting, armed robbery, and car theft have become far more frequent, not only in urban centers like Beirut and Tripoli, but also in rural and once stable areas. Once rare, armed holdups in pharmacies, supermarkets, and banks have made headlines, illustrating how far the country has fallen. In addition to economically driven crime, Lebanon is plagued by widespread corruption and the breakdown of the rule of law. Institutions that are meant to uphold justice, such as the judiciary and internal security forces, are underfunded, politically compromised, and often powerless to enforce the law. Many Lebanese citizens report feeling abandoned by the state, with police often unwilling or unable to intervene in criminal matters unless bribed or politically pressured. The slow and often selective functioning of the courts has further contributed to a culture of impunity, where many crimes go unpunished and powerful figures operate above the law. Smuggling, especially along Lebanon's porous borders with Syria, has become a major form of organized crime. Fuel, medicine, food supplies, and weapons frequently cross the border legally, benefiting powerful networks that include political actors, armed groups, and criminal gangs. The state has been largely ineffective in curbing these operations, partly due to the influence of Hezbollah and other groups that operate with significant autonomy in parts of the country. These smuggling routes have not only undermined the economy, but also deprived the population of essential goods that are already in scarce supply due to the financial collapse. The deterioration of public services and security has also created a breeding ground for communal tensions and vigilante justice. In the absence of a strong central authority, some neighborhoods and sectarian groups have formed their own militias or protection units. Disputes that would typically be resolved through courts are now often settled by force, leading to an increase in armed clashes and revenge killings. The presence of large numbers of refugees, primarily from Syria, has also been exploited by some political actors to scapegoat communities for the rise in crime, further deepening social divisions and xenophobic sentiment. Lebanon's youth, in particular, are among the most affected by the current crisis, with little hope for stable employment, access to education declining, and emigration becoming increasingly difficult. Many young people find themselves vulnerable to recruitment by criminal networks or driven to engage in illicit activity themselves. The brain drain from Lebanon has already reached alarming levels, and continued rise in crime only worsens the sense of hopelessness and disillusionment among the population. Despite these challenges, Lebanon has not entirely lost its capacity for resilience. Civil society organizations, grassroots movements, and certain elements within the security forces continue to advocate for reform and provide support to communities most affected by crime and instability. However, without meaningful political reform, the restoration of economic confidence, and the reestablishment of law and order, Lebanon's crime crisis is unlikely to improve. It is a situation that calls for urgent and sustained action, not only from within the country, but also from international actors who recognize that Lebanon's stability is vital to the broader security of the Middle East. Number 9. Afghanistan. Afghanistan has long struggled with a high rate of crime, much of it fueled by decades of conflict, political instability, and economic hardship. The collapse of formal state structures during periods of war, the presence of insurgent groups, and the weakness of judicial and law enforcement institutions have all contributed to an environment where crime flourishes with minimal accountability. In the years following the withdrawal of international forces and the return of Taliban rule in 2021, the country has seen both continuity and change in its criminal landscape. While the Taliban have claimed to bring security, the reality on the ground remains far more complex, with various forms of crime still deeply entrenched in society. Criminal activity in Afghanistan includes a wide range of offenses, from petty theft and violent assaults to large-scale organized crime. One of the most persistent and damaging forms of crime in the country is drug trafficking. Afghanistan remains the world's largest producer of opium, and the narcotics trade is deeply embedded in the economy, particularly in rural areas where poverty is widespread and alternative sources of income are scarce. Despite Taliban promises to curb opium production, many reports indicate that the drug economy continues to operate, often under the oversight of local power brokers or with tacit support from elements within the ruling structure. The opium trade not only fuels addiction within Afghanistan, but also finances criminal and insurgent networks that operate beyond the country's borders. Kidnappings for ransom, extortion, and robberies have also been common, especially during the years when different parts of the country were controlled by various armed groups. Even with the Taliban's attempt to enforce a stricter law and order environment, many of these crimes persist, particularly in areas where the group has weaker control or where local militias and criminal gangs operate independently. The lack of transparent and functioning law enforcement has left many victims without recourse, while fear of retaliation often discourages families from reporting crimes or seeking justice. In addition, political opponents, journalists, and activists have faced arbitrary detentions, forced disappearances, or extrajudicial actions, often under the guise of maintaining public order, but in reality serving as tools of intimidation and control. Number 8. Iraq. Iraq continues to face significant challenges related to crime, much of which stems from years of war, political instability, economic hardship, and the presence of armed militias. Although large-scale conflict has diminished since the defeat of ISIS's territorial control, the country still suffers from widespread violence and lawlessness in many regions. Organized crime, extortion, illegal arms trading, drug smuggling, and political assassinations are common, particularly in areas where government authority is weak or contested. Armed groups and tribal militias often operate with impunity, controlling territories and engaging in criminal enterprises with little interference. Corruption also plays a major role, with law enforcement and judicial systems often compromised by bribery and political pressure. Ordinary crimes like theft, kidnapping, and fraud have risen, especially as economic conditions worsen and unemployment remains high. In many cases, the population feels unprotected and lacks trust in the authorities, contributing to a climate of fear and impunity. Despite efforts by the Iraqi government to strengthen security, systemic problems and the influence of non-state actors continue to make crime a persistent issue across the country. Number 7. South Africa. South Africa faces one of the highest crime rates in the world, a situation driven by deep-rooted socio-economic inequalities, high unemployment, widespread poverty, and a history of violence. Crimes such as armed robbery, carjacking, home invasions, rape, and murder are disturbingly frequent, particularly in urban centers like Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. Gang violence, especially in parts of the Western Cape, adds another layer of insecurity, with entire communities caught in the crossfire of turf wars and drug trafficking. Despite having a well-developed legal framework, the country's law enforcement agencies are often under-resourced, overstretched, and at times plagued by corruption, which undermines public trust and weakens crime prevention efforts. Many South Africans live in constant fear, altering their daily routines to avoid becoming victims. While the government continues to pledge reforms and enhance policing strategies, tackling the root causes of crime, such as inequality, lack of education, and poor service delivery, remains critical for achieving long-term safety and stability. Number 6. Nigeria. Nigeria faces a deeply entrenched and multifaceted crime crisis that reflects the country's long-standing structural challenges, including economic inequality, political instability, corruption, and weak governance. With a population exceeding 220 million people and vast disparities in wealth and opportunity, Nigeria has become a landscape where both petty and organized crime flourish. From terrorism in the northeast to banditry in the northwest, cult violence in the south, and cybercrime in the cities, the scale and diversity of criminal activity in Nigeria present an overwhelming challenge to both national security and everyday safety for its citizens. In the northern regions, the security situation has been dominated for years by the violent insurgency led by Boko Haram and its splinter group, the Islamic State West Africa Province ISWAP. These groups have carried out mass killings, bombings, and kidnappings, displacing millions of people and undermining any sense of stability in the Northeast. Despite government military campaigns, insurgents continue to control remote areas, tax communities, and launch attacks on civilian and military targets. Meanwhile, in the northwestern and central states, criminal bandit groups operate with increasing boldness, attacking villages, kidnapping school children and travelers, rustling cattle, and demanding huge ransoms. These armed gangs, often better equipped than local security forces, have created widespread fear and forced many communities to abandon their homes. The southern parts of Nigeria are not spared. In the oil-rich Niger Delta, long-standing issues such as oil theft, pipeline vandalism, and attacks on energy infrastructure remain a major concern. Militant groups and criminal syndicates siphon off billions of dollars worth of crude oil annually, depriving the government of critical revenue while devastating the local environment and fueling corruption. Cult-related violence, particularly in states like Rivers, Edo, and Lagos, has also intensified. Cult groups, often involving young men, engage in deadly street clashes, assassination, and extortion driven by political sponsorship, territorial disputes, and a breakdown in community structures. Urban centers like Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt face rising rates of robbery, burglary, carjacking, and financial fraud. One of the most prominent forms of urban crime in Nigeria is cybercrime, popularly known as Yahoo Yahoo. This form of internet fraud, mostly carried out by young people, involves email scams, romance fraud, and identity theft, often targeting foreign victims. The problem has escalated with the growing use of technology and social media, and some perpetrators even gain social status and wealth, further encouraging others to follow the same path. Anti-graft agencies like the EFCC have made high-profile arrests, but the root drivers, youth unemployment, lack of education, and a culture that sometimes glorifies ill-gotten wealth, remain largely unaddressed. One of the greatest obstacles to crime prevention in Nigeria is the weakness of law enforcement and the judicial system. The Nigerian police force, despite having dedicated officers, suffers from poor funding, inadequate training, low morale, and widespread corruption. It is not uncommon for officers to demand bribes, harass citizens, or even collaborate with criminals. Many Nigerians fear or distrust the police, leading to underreporting of crimes and a reliance on vigilante groups or self-defense mechanisms in some communities. The judicial process is also slow and ineffective, with prolonged court cases, weak investigations, and frequent interference from powerful individuals. As a result, many criminals go unpunished, reinforcing a cycle of lawlessness and impunity. Economic factors play a central role in Nigeria's crime problem. With high levels of poverty, inflation, and joblessness, especially among youth, many individuals are pushed toward crime as a means of survival or advancement. The gap between the rich and the poor is stark, and in a society where public officials are often seen living lavishly while basic services remain absent, frustration and desperation fuel a readiness to engage in illegal activities. Social disintegration, broken educational systems, and a lack of opportunities further weaken the moral and legal fabric of communities, making it easier for criminal behavior to thrive. While the Nigerian government has launched various initiatives and security operations to combat crime, progress has been inconsistent. Number 5. Democratic Republic of Congo. The Democratic Republic of the Congo DRC has long been plagued by high levels of crime, much of it tied to prolonged armed conflict, political instability, widespread poverty, and the limited reach of state authority across its vast and resource-rich territory. In many regions, especially in the East, the presence of dozens of armed groups, ranging from local militias to foreign rebel factions, has created an environment where violence, insecurity, and impunity dominate daily life. These groups are responsible for mass killings, kidnappings, sexual violence, forced recruitment of child soldiers, and control of lucrative illegal trade in minerals, such as gold, coltan, and cobalt. Civilians often find themselves trapped between rival groups or targeted as tools of war, with little to no protection from government forces. In major cities such as Kinshasa, Goma, and Lubumbashi, urban crime has also surged. Armed robbery, carjacking, burglary, and street assaults are frequent, and residents frequently report feeling unsafe, especially at night. Police presence is limited or ineffective, and corruption within security forces is a serious issue, with some officers accused of engaging in or enabling criminal activity. Bribery and extortion by law enforcement are common, and for many citizens, the justice system offers little hope of protection or accountability. The lack of trust in authorities has led some communities to turn to vigilante justice or local self-defense groups, which can sometimes become criminal actors themselves. One of the most distressing aspects of crime in the DRC is the widespread use of sexual violence, particularly in conflict zones. Rape has been used as a weapon of war for decades, and while the international community has condemned it, justice for victims remains rare. Survivors often face stigma, trauma, and limited access to medical or psychological support. The slow pace of legal reform and the impunity enjoyed by many perpetrators contribute to a broader culture where crimes against women and girls are underreported and often ignored. Economic hardship plays a significant role in fueling crime across the country. With high unemployment, low wages, and minimal access to education or social services, many people turn to theft, smuggling, or informal black market work simply to survive. In mining regions, illegal exploitation of resources is rampant and child labor is widespread. These areas often operate under control of armed actors or corrupt officials, making them both dangerous and lawless. Human trafficking and forced labor are also serious issues, especially in remote provinces where monitoring and enforcement are minimal. Although the Congolese government has made efforts to restore order, such as deploying the army to conflict zones and attempting security sector reforms, the challenges remain immense. The country's size, lack of infrastructure, and the presence of multiple non-state armed groups make it extremely difficult to enforce the rule of law or maintain consistent governance. International peacekeeping forces, particularly those from the United Nations MONUSCO, have played a role in stabilizing certain areas, but their presence has not been able to eliminate the root causes of violence and crime. Number 4. Paraguay. Paraguay has seen a steady rise in crime over recent years, much of it driven by a combination of poverty, corruption, weak law enforcement institutions, and its strategic geographic position as a transit hub for organized crime in South America. Although the country does not have the same level of violence as some of its regional neighbors, it has become increasingly affected by drug trafficking, arms smuggling, money laundering, and the activities of powerful criminal organizations. Paraguay's location between major drug-producing and drug-consuming countries has turned it into a key corridor for cocaine and marijuana trafficking, particularly through porous borders with Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia. The presence of groups like Brazil's Primeiro Comando de Capital PCC and Comando Vermelho has further complicated the security situation, as these gangs use Paraguayan territory for logistics, storage, and cross-border operations. In rural and border regions, crime is often intertwined with land disputes, illegal logging, and smuggling. Violent confrontations between landowners, indigenous groups, and peasant farmers are not uncommon, especially in areas like Canindeu and San Pedro. Corruption and lack of enforcement allow illicit economies to thrive, and the state has limited capacity to impose control in many of these regions. Urban areas such as Asunción and Ciudad del Este are also experiencing higher rates of street crime, including robberies, assaults, and car theft, which contribute to a growing sense of insecurity among the population. Ciudad del Este, in particular, has a reputation for being a hotspot for contraband and counterfeit goods, with a strong presence in international smuggling networks. The Paraguayan police and judicial systems face major challenges in combating crime. Corruption within these institutions is widespread, and many citizens distrust the authorities, believing that criminals can easily buy their way out of prosecution. As a result, Impunity remains high, and victims of crime often feel abandoned or discouraged from seeking justice. Efforts to modernize law enforcement and improve transparency have been made, but progress is slow, and political interference often undermines meaningful reform. Meanwhile, overcrowded and poorly managed prisons have become breeding grounds for criminal activity, with inmates frequently maintaining control of gang operations from behind bars. Despite these challenges, the Paraguayan government continues to cooperate with regional partners to tackle transnational crime, especially drug and arms trafficking. Number 3. Mexico. Mexico has long struggled with a high crime rate, particularly due to the ongoing battle between powerful drug cartels, organized crime syndicates, and the state. Drug trafficking is a major driver of violence in the country, as Mexico sits along a key drug route between South America and the United States, one of the world's largest consumers of illicit drugs. Cartels such as the Sinaloa, Jalisco New Generation, and Los Zetas are heavily involved in production, distribution, and smuggling of narcotics, and their territorial disputes often result in brutal clashes. These criminal organizations control large swaths of land and cities, engaging in kidnappings, extortion, and human trafficking, which contribute to an atmosphere of fear and insecurity in affected regions. In addition to drug-related violence, other forms of crime in Mexico are pervasive. Kidnappings for ransom, armed robbery, and carjacking are widespread, particularly in larger urban centers such as Mexico City, Monterrey, and Guadalajara. Criminal gangs also engage in extortion, forcing businesses to pay protection money under threat of violence. While the government has deployed federal forces and police to combat crime, these efforts have been hampered by corruption within law enforcement agencies and judicial systems, making it difficult to hold criminals accountable. Police officers, often underpaid and poorly trained, sometimes collude with criminal organizations or fail to respond adequately to the needs of the public. Corruption within political and law enforcement institutions has also exacerbated Mexico's crime problem. Many local and state officials have been accused of working with criminal organizations, either out of fear, greed, or coercion. This corruption undermines public trust in the justice system and makes it difficult to prosecute criminals or dismantle criminal networks effectively. In some areas, drug cartels and other criminal groups have more influence over local governance than the actual authorities, which further weakens the state's ability to control violence and crime. Number 2. Colombia. Colombia has long been plagued by a high crime rate, much of which can be attributed to decades of internal conflict, the presence of powerful drug cartels, and the ongoing struggle between various insurgent groups and government forces. Although Colombia has made significant progress in improving security and reducing violence over the past 2 decades, crime remains a persistent issue, particularly in rural areas and some urban centers. One of the most prominent factors contributing to the country's high crime rate is its involvement in the global drug trade. Corruption remains another significant challenge in Colombia's battle against crime. Public officials, police officers, and military personnel have often been accused of collaborating with criminal organizations, facilitating drug trafficking, or turning a blind eye to criminal activity. This corruption has undermined the effectiveness of the justice system, allowing many criminals to operate with impunity. The judicial system itself is often overloaded and under-resourced, leading to slow trials, insufficient investigation of crimes, and in some cases, a lack of prosecution. Number 1. Myanmar. Myanmar, located in Southeast Asia, has become one of the most crime-afflicted nations in recent years, particularly after the military coup in February 2021. Before the coup, Myanmar had relatively moderate crime rates, but since then, there has been a significant surge in violence, making it one of the most dangerous areas globally. The military coup in 2021 led to a drastic increase in crime, particularly violent crimes. Homicide rates surged dramatically, with the intentional homicide rate rising by over 867% in 2021. This sharp increase reflects the widespread lawlessness and instability that followed the coup. The coup has not only destabilized the political landscape, but has also contributed significantly to the rise in criminal activities, such as murder, assault, and kidnappings, particularly in urban areas like Yangon and Mandalay. In urban centers like Yangon and Mandalay, there's been a noticeable increase in violent crimes such as murder, robbery, and kidnapping. Law enforcement agencies, already stretched thin due to the political instability, have struggled to maintain public order. The military junta has often prioritized maintaining power over providing security, which has left civilians vulnerable to crime. The lack of effective policing has made it difficult for residents to feel safe, and many crimes go unpunished, further fueling the sense of insecurity. The ongoing civil conflict between the military junta and opposition groups has significantly contributed to the rise in criminal activities. Armed insurgents and military forces have been involved in various illegal activities, including drug trafficking, human trafficking, and extortion. The breakdown of law and order, particularly in rural and conflict-affected areas, has created a fertile ground for organized crime to thrive. Armed groups often engage in criminal activities to finance their operations, further destabilizing the country. Despite calls for ceasefires to allow for earthquake relief efforts, the military junta has continued its operations, resulting in numerous civilian casualties. The ongoing violence has hindered humanitarian aid and further entrenched the cycle of violence and crime. The military's actions have not only perpetuated the conflict, but have also allowed organized crime to flourish in regions where governance and law enforcement are virtually non-existent. If you found this information helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Stay safe and stay informed.